It is time for the Sports Memo Every Game on the Board podcast, where we're going over college football, all the Thursday, Friday, Saturday games, starting Thursday night into late on Saturday night. Our first guest, Robbie Veno, will be coming in doing game numbers 105, 106, all the way down to 127, 128, North Carolina, Virginia on Saturday. So we'll be hitting all the Thursday, Friday, and beginning of Saturday games here on this part of the Every Game on the Board podcast. Then we'll be coming back tomorrow with the rest of the Saturday card. But without further ado, we'll bring in today's guest, Robbie Veno. Follow him on Twitter at Rob Veno Sports. Welcome in, buddy. How are you?
I'm doing great today, Drew. How about yourself?
I'm doing good. Excited to get your opinion on these games. I'll tell you, Robbie, we got a big Thursday and Friday slate here, seeing 5 games on each. So just starting here with the Thursday and Friday card, we got a lot going on. What's on your mind with betting college football this weekend?
Yeah, I don't know that I can recall ever seeing Thursday and Friday cards back-to-back as large as these two are, Drew. I don't know exactly what it's for, the reasoning behind it, but it doesn't bother us, right? I mean, the more the merrier. So just gets us involved a little earlier in the week, maybe a little bit more opportunity a little earlier in the week before Saturday morning comes. Yeah,
Robbie, absolutely, and happy to have you on. I mean, you've been killing it. You're 4 and 5% plays this year in college football, which are the top plays, guys, just so you know, on sportsmemo.com. That's how we're rating them. The old 4-star and 5-star plays are 4% and 5%. He's 24 and 13, 65% year to date, and using the unit method, he's up 16 units. So a $100 better would be up $1,600 as far as betting his 4 and 5-star plays. So, Robbie, let's start off at the top of the board here. We got 105, 106 Toledo, Western Michigan. We got some action here. 68 the total, with Western Michigan open 4, bought up to 6.5, pretty much across the board right now. So would you look to lay 6.5 with WMU or Toledo, the Rockets, catching almost a touchdown here, Robbie?
Yeah, it's a difficult decision, Drew. I think that if you just stack these two teams up on paper, you wouldn't figure 6.5 point difference to be the case. But certainly the teams are going in opposite directions, that's for sure. What's happened to Toledo the last couple of weeks, I think, is a little bit inexplicable, especially on the offensive side of the ball, where they are so explosive, or had been so explosive until the last couple of weeks. And meanwhile, Western Michigan just keeps motoring right along, winning games now at 6-2 on the season. Not as good point spread wise, though, a little bit overpriced. You know, it's a good time of year where you can, small sample sizes become larger sample sizes, and when you see a team 6-2 straight up, but only 3-5 against the number, you understand very quickly that they're a little bit overvalued. So 6.5 here. I know that the market is favoring Western Michigan in this game, and like I say, it's probably due to current form. Let me just say before we get into any fundamental analysis here that the power rating number came up Western Michigan at home only -2. So again, talent-wise, these two teams are not. So in fact, Toledo might be the slightly more talented team, but Western Michigan right now, the team that's playing better ball. It's also, Drew, as we hit this last quarter or last third of the season, a lot of these teams are into their last 4 games now. The standings become important at this point in time. And for Toledo, a team that sits in the MAC West at only 1-2, while Western Michigan is 4-0, they've got some ground to make up. If they lose this game, there's no shot at them going to the MAC championship contest, which was a goal of this team to start the season. Obviously, they were ranked very high inside this conference. And at 3-4, they still need 3 wins to become bowl eligible. So I think you're going to get a real focused Toledo team in this particular game. Like I say, they come off of bad offensive performances against Eastern Michigan and Buffalo. To me, kind of inexplicable. One more time, don't know how they go out there and get dominated on the offensive side of the football. That should not happen to them. They're going to have to contain Western Michigan's offense, though, behind quarterback John Wasink, which has been humming all season long, averaging 36.5 points per game. It's the defense that had been somewhat of a sore spot, but to tell you the truth, the defensive efforts haven't been that bad as of late. I'm more inclined to take 6.5 here than I am lay 6.5. I think the Toledo desperation factor certainly comes into play here, and I also think that they're due for an offensive outburst of sorts. And this is a defense in Western Michigan that it can be accomplished against. So ever so slightly toward Toledo, Drew. Is 68 to me, that total's in a real good place. I don't know if I could get involved either way there.
And guys, if you're looking at sportsmemo.com right now, we got a coupon code for Robbie Veno. Veno half, that's VENOHALF, Veno half, for half off of any of his all-access packages. So you can get the 3-day, get Thursday, Friday, Saturday, college football for just half off of that. Or you could do, heck, a full season, 90-day, whatever you want. Veno half when you're checking out for half off. That could be huge savings, over $100 in savings. When you're checking out at sportsmemo.com. We got 107, 108 here, Robbie. Ball State, Ohio. Looks like 64 the total. Ohio laying 10.5 at home. We're seeing some 11s out there at the Sports Memo odds page. How would you look to bet Ball State, Ohio, Robbie?
Looking through Ohio U's numbers in the last 3 games, Drew, to me there's sort of a crossroads here as far as handicapping betting decision goes. They've been able to keep their last 3 opponents to 26 points or less. But when I look at the total yardage they've allowed, I feel like those final point totals are a little bit phony. The old bend but don't break, but eventually that stuff does break. Kent, for instance, 3 games ago totaled 472 yards against Ohio U. Yet only managed 26 points. Northern Illinois, which hasn't played a lick of offense all season long, gained 400 yards against the Ohio U defense, but only came up with 24 points. Last week against the Bowling Green offense, they held them scoreless in the second half. Bowling Green only 314, but 6.3 per play. I just feel like this particular team, Ball State, may have an opportunity to score some points the way Ohio U has given up yardage this season. It's 465.5 yards per game right now for Frank Solich's D. But offensively, they are tough to stop. Quarterback Nathan Rourke, in my opinion, probably the best quarterback inside that conference. Dual threat, able to run the football as well, running that read option as he does throw the football. So they're a very balanced team. I don't know that Ball State can contain them. It leads me right to the total in this game, which took an obvious hit right off the bat. Opened 60.5, pushed right to 64. I can understand why. To me, that would be of more interest, or was at least of more interest than the game itself. I think Ball State's got the weaponry to stay close, and I just don't know that their defense can stop Ohio U. So for me, Drew, when I'm looking at this game, especially with what I see off of Ohio U's last 3 defensive performances and the points allowed more than anything, I think that number's a bit phony. I would still probably look toward over in that game.
Robbie, the next game is an interesting one. I mean, it's only in the Sun Belt, so a lot of people might not be big on it, but it's Appalachian State versus Georgia Southern here. We got App State laying 10 on the road in Statesboro, 48 the total. And Robbie, these two teams, they know each other very well. I mean, they've only been in the Sun Belt, under a decade, but these two teams, the rivalry goes back a long ways. I know you know the FCS, or formerly known as Division I AA, very well. I believe they were in the Southern Conference, and kind of both of these two teams dominated there, has brought the rivalry into the Sun Belt. They know each other very well. This is an interesting matchup because, App State's short preparation time for the option makes me look towards Georgia Southern. I thought it would be a little bit bigger of a number just because App State has dominated so much this season. And Georgia Southern, they've been pretty good, but haven't dominated nearly to the extent that App State has. So it's an interesting matchup, two teams that know each other very well. How'd you look to bet this good one here Thursday night in Statesboro?
Yeah, I think, it's interesting, Drew, because both of these teams, I mean, the fundamental matchup kind of works in Appalachian State's favor, right? Georgia Southern's a run football team, and App State, even though they lost defensive coordinator Nate Woody, who was a huge reason for their success defensively over the past few years, that defense has come to play each and every game. So with the run defense that they have, you would figure it to be difficult for Georgia Southern, which really can't throw the football. I mean, Shai Wert's excellent leading that triple option offense, but not much when it comes to throwing the football. A one-dimensional team, especially run-oriented against Appalachian State, I'll always look towards the Appalachian State side. I think it was interesting last week, though, with Georgia Southern. You know, the total in that game was 55, and really holding around 54 and a half to 55 as of Saturday morning, before Wesley Fields' injury news got out there early Saturday morning, and the total immediately plummeted based off of Wesley Fields. Now, Wesley Fields is a great running back for Georgia Southern. However, in that offense, when you're playing a team like New Mexico State, I don't know that running backs mean run right to the window and start pounding under. Obviously, it didn't work out that way. The over came home very easily last week. Georgia Southern scores 48 points, and they used a trio of running backs to run right over New Mexico State. The good news for Georgia Southern this week is Wesley Fields is back. The groin injury seems to be healed, and he'll be in the lineup. They have a deep stable of backs. But the step up in class here, as far as rush defense, is like night and day between running against New Mexico State and Appalachian State. App State has the same deal at running back, where Jalen Moore went down, and it kind of looked like, how are you going to survive without Jalen Moore rushing the football? Hasn't been a problem. 246 yards. We saw it on TV a couple of weeks ago against Arkansas State. 258 yards last week against Lafayette. They can run. They can throw. For my money, even though they're prepping for the triple option, which they did handle pretty good last season, when you look at the statistical line, for my money, I would much rather have the more diverse offense. I happen to think Appalachian State's a better defense all around, although Georgia Southern might be the second best in that conference. So for me, App State the way to go. And it seems that when we look way, way back to the beginning of the year, that 45-38 close call in overtime at Penn State really wasn't flukish. Appalachian State has just dominated opposition throughout the season. If I didn't play them, I wouldn't play Georgia Southern in this contest.
Robbie, we got an ACC matchup here, a good one. Georgia Tech and Virginia Tech. I think they play every year on Thursday night. I've been to a couple when I lived in Atlanta, but we got 111-112, Georgia Tech at Virginia Tech. 58.5 the total. Looks like Virginia Tech laying 3 at home in Lane Stadium Thursday night. And I'll tell you, Robbie, breaking down this game, I kind of forgot. Georgia Tech lost 3 games in a row, I guess weeks 2, 3, and 4. Had a tough break there, that Pittsburgh game. But other than that, they've really kind of come on, I guess you could say. They did lose to Duke as well. But this Georgia Tech team sitting at 3-4 is a little better than I think their record kind of indicates. I mean, are they within 3 points of on the road in Lane Stadium against Virginia Tech? That remains to be seen, but I think you got to give Georgia Tech a little bit more credit than a lot of people are sitting at 3-4. How do you feel about this one?
Yeah, and for me again, Drew, it's going to come down to the fundamental matchup. I think just watching Virginia Tech all season long, and before they hit the bye week, their final game was against North Carolina, and I came in strong with a 20-star or 5% play on that game over the total, because my opinion of Virginia Tech right now is that if you can throw the football with that crippled defensive backfield, you can really make some hay. North Carolina moved the ball pretty well, just didn't score points. The problem for Georgia Tech is they're just not a great throwing football team. They want to run first. Now, they're capable of making plays over the top. We'll see how many times they put it up in the air in this game. On the season, we've seen them throw it on average about 12 times per game. If they do it 12 times, Drew, they might make a couple of big plays in this contest against that Virginia Tech secondary. With so many young kids running around in that defensive backfield for Virginia Tech, I guess the good news is they had a bye week, so an extra week to prepare for Georgia Tech's option, but I still wouldn't trust young DBs, a young secondary, where at that layer of defense, the discipline is so essential to stopping any option offense. It could be some blown assignments here, missed assignments. Georgia Tech may be able to make enough or suck this Virginia Tech defense up enough to make plays over the top. So they can probably score here. I just would prefer throwing teams right now against Virginia Tech than run-oriented squads like GT is. The other side of the coin, Georgia Tech's defense hasn't been great all season long until the game they lost against Duke heading into the break. They lose by 2 touchdowns, and you're absolutely right. They caught somewhat of a tough break in the Pittsburgh game. Some of it was self-inflicted because they got behind in the first half by so much. But against Duke, they hold that team to 304 total yards, outgain them by 50, run 18 more plays, and still lose by 2 touchdowns. Real hard when you're coughing it up the way they coughed it up 3 times. Even though they got 3 takeaways, it wasn't enough for them to win that contest. So Paul Johnson's team, desperate for wins here. If you just look at the remainder of their schedule and know that they have 3 straight-up wins going in and you need 6 to get to a bowl, they may be favored one time the rest of the year. Not favored here. Probably won't be favored against Miami, even though it's a home game. If they're favored, it'll be slight against Virginia, and they're certainly not going to be favored against Georgia to round out the season. So they have a tough second half here schedule. And they need wins, so I'm going to expect a 100% fully focused effort. I don't know. I might look toward total because I have a hard time debating between these two teams at this price. For me, total of 58.5. If Georgia Tech, like I say, can confuse that young secondary with a run game, no less, it might get over 58.5.
Robbie, let's head to the Big 12 here. Last game we'll talk about for Thursday night. Interesting that they're all 7 or 7:30 Eastern time slots as far as the start time. Don't know why they wouldn't have a West Coast game, but they do on Friday, so we'll talk about some of those. But we got 113, 114, Baylor, West Virginia. This one totaled 67. West Virginia laying 14 at home.
I'm impressed with Baylor, Drew, I have to say. I thought they'd be better this year just because it was Matt Rule's second season and he's such a good coach. But what they've been able to do so quickly in this rebuild process, to me, like I say, is pretty impressive. You're looking at a team right now that I'll even take away the Abilene Christian game, which is an FCS game. But if you take that game away and just look at their other 6 contests, they're only minus 13 in points scored over the course of 6 games. That's really good for a Baylor unit that couldn't play much defense last year, that didn't have much to go to offensively last year. To me, they become explosive. Charlie Brewer might be the most underrated drop-back quarterback in all of college football. When it comes draft time for Charlie Brewer, I would imagine that there's going to be a lot of NFL teams looking his way. Great pocket presence, good thrower of the football downfield, and they've got vertical weapons as good as any in that conference. So I think they match up real well with West Virginia here. What you have to deal with when you're facing West Virginia, obviously West Virginia is going to throw the football right back at you, but you have to avoid the cluster explosions. In other words, for Baylor, don't give up 3 touchdowns before you get one. It's hard to come back against West Virginia. Although we saw Texas Tech try to attempt it a couple of weeks ago. West Virginia had the big lead there. I blame that more on Dana Holgorsen sitting on the lead rather than West Virginia being able to extend if they had just continued to play the way they were playing. I like the 14 points here with Baylor. I know that West Virginia's nationally the more talked about team. I know they've got the bigger names, but for those who haven't seen Baylor this year, you'd be surprised. And especially, I'll say again, on the defensive end for this team, Drew, a Big 12 defense that gives up 400 yards is considered a good defense. Not a great defense, but a good defense if you can give up 400 in Big 12 action. They're only allowing 407 a game, so I don't know that there's a lot of separation here between defenses, and I actually see Baylor's defense getting better. Heck, Texas ran 80 plays in their most recent game, Baylor's most recent game, and only got 389 total yards on that. I know they didn't have their starting quarterback Ellinger, but still, to me, the improvements there, I would look to take the 14 points with Baylor.
Robbie, moving on to the Friday night slate here. We got another ACC matchup, 115-116 Miami at Boston College. Looks like the Canes laying 3.5 up in Boston, 49.5 the total. Not sure what the weather's like. I haven't looked at it, but you're getting a bunch of South Florida boys up there in the Northeast laying 3.5. I think Boston College is the side here, Robbie. What do you think?
Well, it's cold up here now, at least mid-Atlantic where I am. Northeast generally a little bit colder. Just a quick look at the projected weather for that game, Drew, while you brought it up, shows 40-degree temperatures in Chestnut Hill for that particular contest, which you're right. For those South Miami kids, it's, I don't want to call it traumatic, but it's certainly different. Every time we see Central Florida or South Florida have to go to UConn in November, we see kind of different performances out of them because of the cold. It works both ways for them, right? When they when they host the East Coast teams down there in the heat and humidity, it's the East Coast teams that falter. Maybe this does play to BC's advantage. I would say having A.J. Dillon back plays to BC's advantage as well. Although another team, Drew, that really did survive the loss of their top running back very well. Their rushing statistics didn't go down hardly at all without A.J. Dillon, but they will have him back here. I know that it's a big deal for that team because he is the main horse as far as offense is concerned. The other side of the coin, we got a interesting situation, right? For a few weeks, it looked like Perry was the better quarterback of the two. Perry's now on the bench. Mark Richt making an executive decision puts Malik Rozier back at the helm of this football team to try and get some type of offensive spark. They've been a little bit stagnant, and we'll see how they come through here against Boston College. I know Boston College has not been the defensive team that they've been in recent years. In fact, this is probably one of the worst Boston College defenses I can remember. Certainly Miami has the edge there, but it'll be interesting to see if Miami behind Rozier responds here in this game. I know for him, in quotes that I've read, big opportunity. He wants to make the most of it. We'll see how it goes. Very difficult game for me, to tell you the truth, but I do think the return of Dillon helps this thing out, helps BC out quite a bit, and even could help the total in this game, Drew. We're looking at a game that's gone from 58 all the way down to 49.5. BC's been far better offensively than they have been defensively. Cold weather aside, 49.5 is a especially low total. 27-24 wins you that contest over-wise, so maybe we can get to that point.
Good stuff, Robbie. We got 117-118 in the Big Ten. Indiana at Minnesota. Looks like Indiana laying 2.5 on the highway, 54 the total.
Two defenses that have just gone totally south right now. So the first inclination here for this game especially is to look at the total going up and over. It's been bet down. Open 55, comes down to 54. We see 53.5 at Heritage, a key offshore. But for Minnesota, last week against Nebraska, Drew, if you remember, that total got bet down as well, which was kind of curious with the way Nebraska's played football this year. You don't see Nebraska totals being bet down, but that one was bet down and bet down considerably. Guess what? The game totaled 81 points, 53-28, because Minnesota's defense got absolutely raked. 659 yards offense for Nebraska. The week before, Minnesota allows 504 to Ohio State. 2 weeks worth of work on that defensive side of the football, and they've given up 1,163 yards. But the same goes for Indiana. Tom Allen, for all his defensive prowess and for all the strides Indiana's made on the defensive side of the football, they're really not being made lately. Last 3 weeks for this team, 609 yards allowed to Indiana, 479 to Iowa, which we're finding out as the season goes on is a much better offensive team than they've been in the past, 417 to Penn State last week. Defense to me is a problem on both sides here. Now the condition of Zach Annexstad, the quarterback for Minnesota, is important here. You want to see him in the game, but if he plays, it's a very easy move for me to go ahead and play over. I think that each of these offenses certainly capable of gashing the opposing defense. So for me, it's just really it rests upon the injury status of the quarterback here. Looks to me, Drew, like the probability or the likelihood of him going is better than him not going here. So maybe we can get involved a little earlier, but I do like the total there. I just think both of these defenses are worn. And one more thing to mention for folks out there that play these games and you see defenses wear down. Remember that for Indiana, this is going to be their 9th consecutive game without a bye. And when you're not equipped with the defensive depth like some of these other elite Power 5 programs are, that's why these numbers show up. Defense is getting ripped because 9 weeks, well, this will be 8 straight weeks without a bye. This will be the 9th. Really does play havoc with the health and the depth of your football team on both sides. So I think that over might be the way to go there.
Robbie, heading up to the Pac-12, we got game number 119, 120, 10:30 Eastern start time. Utah traveling to LA to play UCLA. Laying 10.5 on the road, 55 the total. I'll tell you this one, UCLA's quarterback situation, I guess the younger kid was last name Robinson. He's pretty good, athletic guy, high ceiling guy. And then they put in Wilton Speight when he got injured, and I think that there's a huge drop off with UCLA's kind of offensive, what they're able to do offensively in Chip Kelly's offense. I think the Utah defense has played really well, and you got Huntley at the quarterback position. He's one of the better athletes in the country, in my opinion. And as long as he doesn't turn the ball over, which he hasn't of late, Utah has been covering spreads, looking really good. Looks like, they're the front runner to win the South and go to the Pac-12 championship here, Robbie. So they are having to lay 10 on the road here. It's the ultimate equalizer, as we know. But I still think it's a little short. What are you thinking about Utah-UCLA?
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right, Drew. For starters, Dorian Thompson-Robinson, the true freshman quarterback for UCLA, obviously that's a Chip Kelly recruit. Chip Kelly recruited him because of his dual threat ability. He's been learning on the fly, and he's been progressing. I mean, when his father hasn't been calling out Chip Kelly's coaching ability, the kid's been doing pretty well. But then he did get hurt last week. You bring in Wilton Speight, who's a standing target for this Utah defense, which is ultra aggressive under Kyle Whittingham, always has been. This team has picked up 20 sacks already on the season. But when you look at some numbers here, Drew, the difference between this young UCLA team, which has freshmen on the field all over the place, against this Utah team, which came into the season with expectations finally of winning, true expectations of winning a Pac-12 South. It's a real mismatch, both age-wise, size-wise, knowledge-wise, a lot of advantages for Utah. But how about this? They dominate the line of scrimmage where the rushing game is concerned to the tune of plus 2.2 yards per carry. Utah averages 4.6. They only give up 2.4. When you can get a plus over, a yard and a half, that's monstrous. When you can get it over 2 yards, that's really big. UCLA won't do much on the ground here. If I just go to total yardage, Utah's outgaining people by 142 yards per game now. Outstanding on that front as well. There's so many reasons to like Utah at this point in time. The way they absolutely plowed through USC last week was the convincing factor for me. Not that I didn't. I mean, I played Utah personally going into that game, so I thought they were the far better team. But what they've been able to do the last 4 weeks, ever since that Washington game, where Huntley really looked terrible, and there were beginning to be questions about him at quarterback. The bye week came, and since then it's been all downhill. Utah's been very, very good. I think they probably ruined UCLA here. A large double-digit victory isn't out of the realm of possibility, and I think with Wilton Speight in there, like you mentioned right off the top, that's a difference maker just in this matchup because Utah will attack him, they'll attack him, and they'll attack him again.
Yeah, good breakdown. I agree with you, Robbie. We got 1-2-1, 1-2-2, Wyoming, Colorado State, 46 the total. Looks like CSU laying 2.5 at home.
It could be time, Drew, to switch it up here and play Colorado State. At least that's the way I'm leaning in this game, because Colin Hill came back to play quarterback last week, and it looks like Colin Hill is now going to be the starter again. From the very first game of the season, I just had a opinion after watching him that KJ Carter-Samuels was not the guy to have this Colorado State offense be as prolific as it was last season. He's proven to be extremely inconsistent, turns the ball over at bad times, and now with Colin Hill back off injury and as the starter here, I think I could like Colorado State to increase their offensive output, which is always a good thing when you're playing Wyoming, because you're not going to get much offense out of them. You see these matchups and you come to a crossroads and you have to make a decision. The Wyoming offense, as poor as it is, can it do damage against the Colorado State defense, which has been miserable all season long? And you watch enough Wyoming football, Drew, and you come to the realization that, no, they really can't. I mean, as bad as a defense can be, Wyoming's not going to hurt you. So with Hill back, and I think the Colorado State offense, which just picked up, by the way, 489 yards last week against Boise State. So certainly Boise State's defense in the category of Wyoming's. I know Wyoming's a great defensive team by Mountain West standards, but certainly Boise State just as good. So if CSU can do that against them, I feel like they can really shred the Wyoming defense here. I just like Hill, and I think for the remainder of the season, I'm probably going to be looking at Colorado State a little bit more than I was earlier. Earlier on to this point of the season, you're only looking at Colorado State where totals are concerned. You're looking to play over. Right now, I think you can look at them as a side with Colin Hill at quarterback.
Robbie, we got a Conference USA matchup here to end the Friday talk about games. 131-132, Louisiana Tech at FAU. This is a game I'm trying to talk myself into going, Robbie. I haven't checked out the new FAU stadium. It looks pretty cool on campus there, right up 95 from where I live. But this one, 58's the total, 3.5 FAU laying at home. This number kind of surprised me when it came out, just because FAU, it's almost like people are remembering last year, not this year. But I don't know. What's your take? I would actually look to bet this one La Tech.
Yeah, I'm actually a fan of La Tech. I'm real surprised at I wasn't real surprised, but I guess I was more surprised at the margin that they lost by to UAB. It came on the heels, remember, of that North Texas game, which was touted as, and rightfully so, as a CUSA showdown at the end of September. Louisiana Tech goes into Denton, and they win the game straight up, 29-27. At that point, North Texas was becoming a steamroller type of darling for bettors. Everybody flocking to North Texas, people starting to learn that the quarterback's name is Mason Fine. For me, the difference in North Texas after watching their very first game against SMU was defensively. They just looked really, really good defensively, not like what North Texas looked like last year. Louisiana Tech goes into that place and wins that game. So walking into FAU Stadium is not going to be a problem. And certainly they're going to want to gain some type of revenge, because last year Florida Atlantic was slapping around anybody that stood in front of them inside Conference USA. I think Louisiana Tech has the upper hand in this case. You got to love their quarterback play with Jamar Smith. They've got the receivers, Teddy Veal and company, and the defense to me is, far superior to that of Florida Atlantic. Key for FAU, they just haven't got the same quarterback play as they did last year. Robeson hasn't been nearly what they thought he would be. Singletary, those Heisman billboards probably should have been ripped down a couple of weeks ago. He hasn't been able to get on track because the offense hasn't had as much balance. So I think Louisiana Tech in an underdog situation, even though it's on the road, don't mind Skip Holtz's team on the road after seeing what they did in North Texas. Certainly, in my mind, to go on the road and win in North Texas, more difficult this year than it is to go on the road and win at FAU. So for me, it would be Louisiana Tech here.
Yeah, catching 3.5, I'm with you. Guys, let's move on to the Saturday slate. We got 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 4. MTSU, Middle Tennessee, at Old Dominion. Looks like MTSU laying 4 on the highway, 59 the total. I'll tell you, Robbie, MTSU got lucky beating Charlotte. They had 8 3-and-outs, a bunch of turnovers from Charlotte, and MTSU, I believe, won by either 7 or 10 points. So kind of got lucky last week. What's going on with MTSU, and you think they can cover this 4-point spread against ODU?
Yeah, and you know what? We could use it for both, Drew, because as somebody who had the Old Dominion game over the total last week, I was very happy with the way that game ended. And then, to boot, Old Dominion wins the contest outright in overtime, so they got a little bit lucky themselves, Old Dominion, last week to win. But what's not lucky for them is that offense. It's so explosive with Blake LaRussa at quarterback. I mean, they fell right into that, right? All of a sudden, you have to call on your backup 4 weeks ago, and he slings it all over the place against Virginia Tech, and he hasn't stopped doing it since. Middle Tennessee is going to have to contend with that this week. You have to outscore Old Dominion to beat Old Dominion. And Middle Tennessee, we've talked about them, Drew. When you watch them play, it just doesn't look like Rick Stockstill's offense that we have become accustomed to. It's so much of a dink and dunk style. They're so pedestrian on offense. They don't move it in big chunks. Last week, 144 total yards against Charlotte. That's ridiculous. So I think that this team is a shell of itself. They got kind of, to use your word again, lucky to end up in the position that they're in inside the CUSA standings, where they kind of hold all the cards right now, or almost all the cards, with Florida International, a game against them where they won. They would win any tiebreaker. So, they lost that game. FIU wins the tiebreaker, but still, they're in a real good position at the top of that Eastern Division. But I think it's kind of phony. I'm with you there. The results that they've put up here, point-wise, don't suggest that they can get into a firefight with Old Dominion. And Old Dominion's going to force it to be that way, Drew. They don't play enough defense, and they continue to pound you vertically down the field. And they've even gotten a real good semblance of a running game put together now to add to this mix. I think I'd like ODU. In years past, this would be a great matchup for Middle Tennessee State, but it's just not the same team anymore. They're better on the defensive side. That's become their anchor, but I don't know that they can score with ODU, so I would probably have to look that way.
Guys, remember Rob Veno's coupon code at sportsmemo.com to get half off of his all-access packages. You can get any of his all-access packages, 3-day, all the way up to 90-day, full year, whatever you want, half off. Can get huge savings there at sportsmemo.com with the coupon code VENOHALF, VENOHALF at checkout. Robbie, we got 2 games left here for this segment, then we'll be back tomorrow to finish off the College Football Every Game on the Board podcast. Finishing off in the ACC with these 2 matchups. First up, NC State at Syracuse. Looks like the Wolfpack looking to bounce back. According to the betting markets, 2.5 on the road, 65 the total, Robbie.
Yeah, and how about the Syracuse situation, Drew, as I read this week? And this is, it's critical to me. But the fact that Eric Dungey may be replaced at quarterback by Tommy DeVito, and in the words of head coach Dino Babers, Tommy DeVito would be installed as the new starter. If he is, it would be because he wants to create a spark for his offense. And I never thought that I'd hear those words where Eric Dungey's concerned, the dual-threat quarterback for Syracuse, who, of course, has gone through some injuries during his career. But every time he's been on the field, from an overall perspective, in his career at Syracuse, he's been a dynamic quarterback and leads that offense. But they may go to a coaching change here. Now, it's not the end of the world to put Tommy DeVito in. He's a very good thrower of the football. Last week he comes in, he goes 11 of 19 for 181 yards, throws 3 touchdowns against UNC. I don't know which way the coach is going to go here. He's got 2 options. Either one will pose a bit of a problem to the NC State defense. I think more than anything, though, Drew, what you have to wonder is how quickly Dave Dorn can get these guys to bounce back. Again, you go into that Clemson game with a lot of hope that if you pull that win off, an ACC championship game is staring you right in the face. But they got slaughtered by Clemson. That game was a mismatch on all fronts, and I've been waiting for the week where NC State defensively, got, I don't want to say run over, but at least gave up a lot of yards to an opponent, because with all the talent that they lost on the defensive side, to me, it's either fantastic coaching in getting these new kids to play well, or something, because I just didn't think they would be the same type of defense that they were last year. Up till last week they were. Last week they were exposed somewhat. Syracuse's offense can expose any defense. It's going to be a tough matchup for NC State if they're not fully ready to play this game. You could see them losing their second game in a row here very easily. But again, it's hard to get inside the heads of these kids. It's hard to know for sure, because each situation is different, whether or not NC State can bounce back off of that loss last week. Some teams can shake it off. Some teams it sticks with them. We'll find out which one NC State is in this contest. Total's going from 60 all the way up to 64.5 in most places, and all of a sudden, I think off of what we saw last week, and especially the throwing of the football by Clemson against NC State, I think that a lot of people are maybe somewhat not giving up, but somewhat seeing the NC State defense for what it is and going ahead and playing over here.
Robbie, one more game in the ACC, and guys, make sure to check out Rob on Twitter at Rob Veno Sports, or myself at Drew Martin Betts. Feel free to hit us up with any questions. We'll be back on tomorrow's together as well, alongside Teddy Covers will be on, and we'll have Kyle Hunter on as well too. But we got one game left here, and remember the coupon code VENO half for half off of any of Rob Veno's All Access on sportsmemo.com. Let's finish it off here. 127-128 UNC at Virginia, 51 the total, 8.5 or 9 depending where you shop on UNC Virginia. Virginia laying 8.5 or 9 at home. Robbie.
Yeah, certainly Virginia's been a revelation this year, right? Bronco Mendenhall. I've said it a couple times before. Give them credit for having the guts to change that offensive system once again this year, but it's really worked out for them. Last week was a tough loss for the other side in this game. North Carolina, which was right there with Syracuse, and came from behind, lost the lead in the fourth quarter, then had to match touchdowns in overtime, wind up losing 40-34. Nathan Elliott, a guy who I've been wishy-washy on all season long, the quarterback for UNC, does go 34-52 for 321. I think we had a question last week, Drew, right? I think one of the listeners gave us a question. Did we expect North Carolina's offense to improve now as the season went on? And it all revolves around Elliott. And last week he was good. If he's good this week, they'll be good again. However, I don't know how good he'll be against this Virginia defense, slowly but surely, and they're still under the radar. But statistically, they've been a very good D so far this year. Only 326 yards per game allowed. They don't give it up on the ground, less than $120 per game. And they thrashed Duke last week, 28-14 final score. And Duke was never really in that game. That came on the heels of beating Miami of Florida 16-13. So we can't even look to the schedule and say Virginia's made the most out of a weak schedule. I mean, that's two very, very good opponents in a row as far as ACC play is concerned, and they win them both straight up. Right now, to me, they're the far better team, and if Elliott gets pressured, I just don't like him, Drew, against teams that can really get to him, and I feel like Virginia can. The run defense is stout enough. So for me, you don't like to lay this many points with UVA because they're not a high-scoring team. But I think they've got enough, and the defense creates enough short fields to help them out here. So I'm probably going to look that way. As much as I'd like to play North Carolina, I don't know that I can against this team.
All right, great stuff, Robbie. And we will be back tomorrow to finish off the College Football Every Game on the Board podcast. Thanks for listening, guys. Best of luck with your bets.